What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to talk some fountain pens. And for those of you that are kind of new to the channel, you may have followed us from our other YouTube channel. You may be curious about this stuff. Maybe you are just stumbling on this video randomly and want to know how to fill the different kinds of filling systems in fountain pens. So I've got a few here that we're going to talk about. Hopefully this will help you in deciding how far in you want to go. Some of these are super easy. Some of them are a little more complicated. Some of them take a little more know-how or a little more fiddly. And there's a couple of them that are super easy. But the possibilities are endless once you get into the ones where you can, use, like different ink bottles and various colors and all kinds of colors that are available. So yeah, we'll jump into it. So we've got a few different kinds of filling systems here. I'll show you how I do it anyway. I'm sure there's other ways. If you have suggestions, get in the comments and let us know. I will also leave links to as much of this stuff in the description as possible. If you use those links, it does help the channel. In fact, there's one of those links, Atlas Pens Dylan 10, D-Y-L-A-N 10, 10. Dylan 10 will get you 10% off. So you can check that out, and it does help out the channel. So I appreciate that. Well, let's dive into this. All right, so here's the kind of the main, at least in my mind, the main filling mechanisms. We're going to use a cartridge in our Kaweco Sport here. This is a converter in this pen. This is a piston pen. This is a vac filler. And then these two will be eyedroppered. But these two are actually two different ways of eyedropping, so that's why I got both of them. So let's go ahead and start with the most basic of them so far, which is going to be the cartridge. So most pens are going to just come with, in fact, a lot of pens, even if they're a converter, we'll get to in a minute, will come with a cartridge way of filling. And what the cartridge is, for those of you that are not familiar, is it's just this little cartridge full of ink right here. It's a disposable dude, and there's a little plastic ball right there. And what happens is when you press it onto the pen, you see that little nipple right there? That little nipple will actually pierce and like pop that little ball in, releasing the ink to be able to flow down into the nib. So when we put this in here, it kind of, see it's sort of wobbly, and when you push on it, see I just popped it, and it popped that ball out of the way, and now it's fit onto the section, and then we just put the pen like so back together. Now, in this type of writing instrument with that cartridge, it will not write right away. So what I typically do is I'll put the cap back on it, and I'll just, I don't know, set it in a coffee cup or something, tip down like this for, I don't know, sometimes it happens right away, sometimes it takes 10 or 15 minutes, just depends on the nib, depends on the ink, the viscosity of the ink and whatever. A couple of tips: make sure your pen is dry, because when your pen has water in it, like water all in the nib and the feed and stuff, that'll goof around with the capillary action and it'll make it take longer. I have noticed that, or it might not move at all. So I like to have them completely dry. So if you've cleaned your pen, maybe leave it overnight, or just otherwise make sure it's dry. But in about 10 minutes or so, or however long, that pen will be ready to write. If you're really in a hurry, one of the things you can do, and I'm not going to do it right now because I don't have a piece of paper in front of me to test this, but one of the things you can do is give this a little squeeze and push ink through the feed that way if you're really in a hurry. But, results may vary, and the amount of mess that you make may vary as well. So, Kaweco Sport, cartridge fill, cool. Now, a lot of pens like this here, Edison, have cartridge or converter. You'll hear them say cartridge converter pens. That is because when we pull the barrel of this pen off, you will see, ooh, a lot of threads. This is a converter, okay? And so what this really is it's a piston. Oh, there's water in here. Dang it. All right, well, we'll get back to that. I'll go ahead and dry that out and make sure that that is clean and dry by the time we do this. Anyway, if we pull this off of here, this has that same nipple, and we could actually put we could put a converter or a cartridge, just like we did in that pen, in this pen. But the reason they say cartridge or converter is because basically what this does is this converter, without water in it, converts the pen to a piston pen. And so now you can use this as a piston pen, and we can now use whatever color ink we want to fill our pen. So let's fill this pen. Let me go dry this converter out real quick though. All right, so we got this pen ready. We'll go ahead and put the converter back in there. Put the piston all the way down to the bottom like so. Take the lid off the ink. This is my favorite ink to put in this pen. We lower the nib into the ink, and we, see if I can make sure that you can see it here. We start drawing ink up into the pen, just like so. See there? Oh, I got a relatively full fill the very first time. Very good. So now the piston, the converter, is full of ink. Grab a paper towel. Just wipe off the end of the pen here so that it's nice and clean, it doesn't make a mess. Recap the ink before we have a situation there. Replace the body of the pen, and you are ready to write. Now in this situation, because we drew ink up through the nib, this pen will write right away. And we are inked up with Scotch Brown and ready to go. All right, the next pen is going to be a piston filling pen. So this is an interesting pen because basically it's the same sort of thing that we saw a minute ago with a piston inside this pen. See, when we pull this, turn this knob back here, there's a piston that draws ink up into the pen. This is a TWSBI 580 ALR. This is a great pen, by the way. I'll leave links to all this stuff in the description so you can get some because they're super cool. Some of this stuff is really neat. Anyway, this pen is a piston, so it's basically a built-in version of what we just saw. There is no way to use a cartridge in this pen. You have to use bottled ink to fill it. And yeah, so there you go. So that's what that is. So let me grab an ink color that I think is cool for this pen. This is Wearingeul Frankenstein. It's got some shimmer in there, so we need to tumble this all around and make sure that that shimmer doesn't stick on the bottom. All right, nice and mixed up. Cool. Same thing, we're just going to dip the nib into the ink here, and we're going to turn the knob, and it is going to draw ink up into the pen. Boom, like so. Now you could run it up and down a couple of times, you know, and try to get as full of a fill as possible. I like a bunch of different colors of ink all the time, so I don't really care, because if I use this up, I'm just going to fill another pen, you know, fill another color into it. So there you go. Let's just clean up that nib. And that pen will be ready to write immediately. And you can see the ink sloshing around in that there pen. And that thing will be ready to write because we drew it up through the nib again with that one. Next, this is an interesting setup. This is a Narwhal Original Plus. The way this pen works is very interesting. There is a piston on the back, but this is not a piston filler. This is a vacuum filler. It's real hard to explain, but there's two cylinders in here. There's an internal cylinder and then an external sleeved outside cylinder. So when you pull this piston back, basically, well, it's actually, I take that back. It's actually one cylinder, but what happens is there's a little flare at the end down here. So when you push down on this, see there's a lot of resistance, and it's going to get to a spot right about here, and it's going to let go. See how it popped like that? And what happens is when you put the nib into the ink bottle and you push down on it, what's happening is you're building a vacuum behind here. Okay, because this rubber seal is sealed up. It's building a vacuum behind here. And when it gets to there, it releases, and then all of a sudden that vacuum sucks ink up into the bottle or up into the pen. It's super neat the way this works. These are pretty cool. Let me grab some TWSBI Royal Purple here. I think that's what this is. And so the way this works, this is Leslie's pen. The way this works is you go up like this, and it's kind of a one-handed motion thing too. So you put the nib down in there, like so. I'm gonna do it two-handed though, because I want you to be able to see what goes on here. So you push this down. So I can feel it happening. So you're gonna see ink, as soon as I get to this lower spot, it's gonna pop up into the pen. All right, let's do it again. Yep, there it goes. Now, we could do it a couple more times and get even a fuller fill, but like I said, it's fun just to have a color in there for a while and then swap it out anyway. So I should say another feature of these vac fillers is that when you then screw this cap back down, there's a seal down here that happens. And so the front half of the pen has a different compartment of ink than the back half of the pen. So when you write this out, when you run out of ink here, all you do is loosen this just a little bit, and it creates a little gap in there like that, and then we'll refill that again, and then you probably get a couple pages of writing out of one fill. But it's cool because it makes it easy for traveling, because then you have less opportunity for spillage or any other kind of problem like that. It's kind of cool. So that is a vac filler, vacuum filler. This is a Narwhal Original Plus. This is a really neat pen, and these are really not that expensive for the amount of features that you get with them. So this is Leslie's. All right, now this is an interesting pen. This is a Franklin Christoph model number 45. The cool thing about this pen is there's a couple of ways you can fill it. One way is that you can put a cartridge in it. Okay, so we could put a cartridge in it, and that little dude right there would pierce through, and we would have ink. But I like to eye drop this pen, which means we're actually going to fill the body of the pen with ink. Now, if you do not have metal present that will corrode with the ink and have reactions with the ink, a lot of pens can be eye dropped. If it's all a resin pen, plastic, acrylic, like that, with not a bunch of metal parts in it or any metal parts in it, you can usually do it if it's going to seal up well. So this pen can be eye dropped or cartridge converted, or cartridge. This pen can be eye dropped if you want. In fact, my other one is eye dropped. This pen actually can be eye dropped. You can actually take the converter out and just fill the other, fill the barrel of the pen with ink, and you can do it that way. And then the cool part about that is it makes the capacity really super huge. Now we have to do something to make this possible, and I'll show you that in a minute. But before we do, I want to show you, actually, no, let's do it right now. So what I've got here is some silicone grease. And what this will do, and you don't need a lot, but so I'll show you how I do this. And I'm sure there's other ways to do it, but basically Just take a little dab on your finger. You don't need a lot. And basically take these threads and just give it a wipe around the threads, because when you eyedrop a pen, we don't want to have any ink seeping through the threads over time. So having that little seal right there will allow that to happen. So that guy will be ready for when we need it. And then we will take this guy here, and we need to fill it with some ink. I think I'm going to put Pilot Iroshizuku Yamabudo in this ink, in this pen. I'm going to use an ink syringe, and I'm just going to draw a little bit up in here. It doesn't take that much. And we're going to go straight into the body of the pen. Now, I'm going to try not to get it on the threads. And we're just going to fill the body of the pen up to, oh, right about there or so. Try not to get it on the threads. Oh, that was about exactly the perfect amount that I had in the syringe. Perfect. Now, with our silicone prepped lid, or section, we're going to screw that guy in there like so. And that is now going to be inked up once. Now remember, we have not drawn ink through the nib, so we're going to have to wait for the ink to go down into the nib. So this is another one where I'm going to set it, you know, in a coffee cup or whatever for a few minutes, and the ink will work its way down there. Make sure the pen is dry ahead of time. That makes it easier, etc., like we talked about earlier. Now, one other pen, I'm not going to ink it up right now, but one other pen I want to show you that is, this is an eyedropper pen too. This is an Opus 88 Omar, and this pen is made to be an eyedropper, okay? So you'll notice that you have to unscrew it a lot of times to get the lid off, because they want it to seal up. And then this pen actually screws apart. And you'll see that there is an extra O-ring here. There's an extra O-ring inside the section area. And there is a rubber seal right here. So this is not a vacuum filler like the other pen. This is not a piston either. They call this a Japanese eyedropper. And basically, you pull this back, you fill up this barrel with ink, and then when you push this down, this piston meets with this little spot right here. It mates up with this little spot inside the pen. And it does something very similar to the vacuum filler, where once the lower section is full of ink, you can then isolate the back of the pen from the front of the pen with this piston knob, or with this stopper knob, basically. And you can write, you know, a couple of A5 pages, 5mm spacing, without running out of ink. And then once you realize you might be starting to run out of ink, you just pull this back just a little bit. In fact, you just need to unscrew it a little bit like that. It will refill that section, and then you can close it back up. That seems a little inconvenient, but the cool part about it is it makes it to where you can have an absolutely massive ink supply with you without worrying about any kind of accidents, because this pen seals up so well, and you'll see there's a lot of threads to get the cap on. So to travel with this pen, to fly with this pen, like that sort of thing, this is a super cool pen because you can seal off the front from the back, much like you can do that with this pen here, just with an eyedropper setup. Well, hopefully that helps. You know, some of these are super simple, right? When we showed you the cartridge one, there's not a lot of fiddling around, but the downside to it is that the ink choices are less. You know, there's literally thousands of ink colors that you can use in a fountain pen, but if you use a cartridge, that limits that quite a bit. We go all the way to doing something like eyedropping, which can put a little more risk maybe, depending on the pen, can also put in a little level of difficulty using grease and using a syringe and all that sort of stuff, and then everywhere in between with the other ones. So hopefully this helps you kind of select where you want to go, or maybe encourages you to experiment with something that you might not have experimented with yet. Anyway, I'll leave a couple of good examples that are fairly affordable for these different types of things in the links in the description that you can use. Those will help out the channel if you use them, but you don't have to. And thanks for hanging out. Hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next video.